Hi, and welcome to Tugboat Settle for More show. Once again, my name is Cameron. I'm one of the founders here at Tugboat.
I'm Aaron, another founder.
We are also cousins. I don't know if you could tell by looking at us. Most people can't. Today's topic is going to be how to get a denial overturned. So we're going to dive into this and see how it goes. Cue theme music. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to say, I usually throw it over to you for the first question, but I'm going to throw it back to me right away.
Keep it.
I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep
no
it.
Throw.
What I have to say first about getting a denial overturned is that it is really difficult, really hard for a public adjuster to do, hard for an attorney to do, and certainly hard for a homeowner to do on their own. When we started building Tugboat and coming up with the idea for it and thinking about what we were going to help people advocate for themselves for, we questioned, does it even make sense to help people advocate for themselves to get a denial overturned in certain situations where it might seem appropriate, right? And then we decided to start trying it, and we started seeing some success with it. Mm-hmm. So we've seen quite a few denials now overturned for Tugboat users with them advocating for themselves, which is kind of absurd, right? If a public adjuster can't do it, if an attorney can't often do it, and of course both those roles can at some point, but I know public adjusters that will not take denials, right? And they'll say, nope, they just have to go straight to an attorney. That's the only way to deal with this at all. So we have seen some success in helping Tugboat users advocate for themselves in getting a denial overturned. First question I have to you, and I haven't prompted you with any of my thoughts on these, so we'll just see where you go with it. What does a person need to do if they hope to get what is an unjustified denial overturned?
Read their policy.
That's what I had written down here.
Yeah.
Which is a really common refrain when an advocate is talking about insurance policyholders and claims and insureds. Like, we can all kind of harp on, like, oh, nobody really reads their policy, and not to mention the fact that how difficult it is to actually even get a copy of the policy. But it is very common for adjusters, even independent or staff adjusters, ones that work for insurance companies, to almost like condescendingly say, like, well, they just need to read their policy and then they'll learn.
And to be clear, we're talking about the full policy. It's at least 30 pages.
Usually 70.
Yeah. And we're not talking about that declarations page that just says like what property is insured. We're talking about the full policy.
Yeah, or the 5 to 10 page version that's like a more summary version. Like, it's reading the full policy. And I will admit this, we don't tell Tugboat users always to read their full policy. A lot of times it is not necessary for them to get a fair shake in their claim, most likely, right? A lot of times it's look at your estimate, ask these questions about it. Look at the damage, ask these questions about it. But when your claim is denied in full or in part, and you want to get that partial denial overturned, and it's unjustifiably denied, the first step is going to be reading your policy. And when we say read it in full, the reason for that is it may be tempting to only read the portion that they're naming in the policy, right? You have water damage, and they name the water damage exclusion.
And they'll quote policy language. You'll get a page with a denial that's saying the sections of the policy that were used to deny that claim.
Yeah.
You don't want to take their word for it that's the full reflection of your whole policy.
Yeah, or the full reflection of what is relevant from your policy. This is the important part, right? Mm-hmm. So the reason that it is imperative that you read the full policy and just take some time, sit down, grab a cup of coffee, read all 70 pages of it, is because you may find the language that you need in some other portion of that policy, right? In some other area that dives into, extra endorsements or definitions about what they denied, right? You may find something in the definition section related to that denial, or you realize that it's related to the denial, and they didn't name it.
So rather than just talk about it in the abstract, because it's going to be difficult to wrap our head around, why don't you give a specific example about when that language matters in the definitions portion.
I'm sure we're thinking about the same one because we've talked about it so much recently, and it's going to be State Farm and slab leak denials, right? So State Farm almost across the board now denies all slab leaks, especially in California. So when we say slab leak, that is a leak that happens in or below the slab, and then water comes through the slab, the concrete portion of the ground, and damages the house. So you file a claim for that, and State Farm will almost certainly deny it. And they will name a couple portions of the policy most likely in that denial letter. So State Farm's going to talk about in that denial letter where that leak needed to be happening for it to be covered. And they're going to say there's a portion of the policy that essentially says that the leak from a plumbing structure needs to be coming from within the building structure. Mm-hmm. And
you don't even have to explain beyond that because this is where it gets super
this is where it gets squirrely. So they're going to name some other portions as well, but they're going to say that the leak needs to be coming from within the building structure. And if they can't prove that it was in the concrete of the slab, then it is not within the building structure. It could be below the concrete of the slab and therefore not within the building structure. Now, what they will not name, but you would find dozens of pages before that in the definitions section is what is the building structure? That is actually defined in State Farm's policies as far as we know and the ones that we've seen. Mm-hmm. And
in every one that we've seen with this denial.
In every one.
It's had the building structure defined in the definitions to include the slab and aggregate material 16 inches below the slab.
Yeah, 16 or 12 or 18 inches or something like that, but it's more than a foot below the slab where a lot of these leaks actually occur. And there are other reasons why, even if it was deeper than that it should also be covered because the other portions of the denial shouldn't be applicable either. But that is just one example where if you got that denial letter and you went and read just that portion of the policy, you may be fooled into thinking, I guess I don't have coverage for this because it's not within the building structure. You may, in your mind, think that within the building structure is just anything within your walls, right? And that maybe that makes sense to you. But if you had gone to read that definition section much earlier in the policy, you would have learned that the building structure included this aggregate material underneath the slab.
And that definition was put in there by the same people who wrote the exclusions.
Exactly.
So that's not some sneaky.
No.
That's part of the policy, and that's part of that exclusion.
Yeah. Exactly. So our point is that can happen fairly often. You'll get a denial based on a piece of the language from the policy, and you need to read that policy in its full context to understand if it's applicable to you. You need to really hone in on the section of the policy that they are naming in their denial. Oftentimes we've seen just recently where they highlight the beginning and end of a sentence and act like those two portions of the sentence go together into one sentence, and therefore together they equal a denial of a claim. And you have to pull that apart and be like, well, what about all these words in the middle of the sentence that seem to also speak to this and be in my favor? Why are we ignoring those? So reading the policy when your claim is denied is pretty much an imperative. Mm-hmm. You really need to do that. So
there's a lot of sections within a policy that may seem to be about the topic of that is relevant to your denial, but are more closely talked about and more specifically talked about elsewhere. So just because they pick a section that may broadly seem to focus on yours, that coverage may actually not be applicable in that section of the policy because it's more specifically addressed in another spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So I don't want to downplay that it is a bit of a chore and it is not fun to read your policy. But in most states, we can help.
Well, we can help even just point you in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
Even if we're not the ones helping you determine your policy, we can make that chore of combing through that 70 pages
much easier.
Much more reasonable undertaking.
We have enough understanding of most of the common policies with most of the carriers, and a pretty good understanding of the denials that they send, that if we see potential that it relates to other ones that have been overturned, especially like, oh, go read this section in that policy. See if it has language like this. So yeah, we can certainly help with that. That's for sure. And have been pleasantly surprised, as we already mentioned, to see a lot of users get their denials overturned when they have advocated for themselves and named the policy language.
Yeah, but let's ping back on that, because even with that, so let's say, like, is that a slam dunk, Cameron? You go ahead, you point, and you're like, hey, the definitions include the building structure. You guys wrongfully denied this. Claim's covered now, right?
Oh, gosh, I wish so. I wish that was the case. We said at the beginning it's hard, right? Yeah. It's difficult. So that difficulty doesn't typically end at just reading your policy. I wish it did. I wish it was that simple. And it should be that simple. Like, I want to acknowledge that when a claim is unjustifiably denied, the hurdles that a homeowner has to jump through to get that overturned are so unfair most of the time. It shouldn't be that way. People, especially professionals, adjusters, their supervisors, the ones that make these decisions, should be able to more quickly say we were wrong. And that is one of the difficult things, is oftentimes, we've seen quite a few denials get overturned with people advocating for themselves. But those people have been put through the ringer by the time they get there, typically. It is usually, sometimes it's quick. We've seen it happen with one letter. But oftentimes it's not. Sometimes they had to write them 4 or 5 or 6 or more letters, request new adjusters, talk to supervisors.
Get their agent involved.
All kinds of different things to get to the end of that negotiation where they actually got the claim covered. And what's so disappointing about that is that's then the beginning of a new negotiation, right? Like, you're starting the claim fresh, essentially at that point.
And it's old, and the damage isn't fresh. Sometimes it's been exacerbated by being unmitigated for a period of time. There's all these new complications that would have been avoided, and there's no swift mechanism for reconciling any of that, like, additional, like, pain and suffering, essentially, that the policyholders put through once the fact that denial was wrongful is finally conceded.
So, next step, someone has read their policy, figured out that they don't think that this denial is justified based off what they're reading, based off what maybe they've researched a little bit, maybe based off of some tips they got from an online resource. Maybe it's called Tugboat. Who knows?
I heard of them.
Yeah. So what is going to be the next step? They've read their policy. They've realized that they think that there's relevant portions of it that will help, that they should be pointing out, and they should be pushing against this claim denial.
Put those in an email and ask questions. Frame them as questions.
We're on the same page today. Literally, next section, asking questions.
It's almost like I peeked at your notes. I swear I didn't. Have the adjuster or manager, supervisor, whomever's involved at this point, sometimes it's been escalated, right?
Yep.
But have them, and every claim's unique. Sometimes your contractor's already been advocating for some of this. There's a lot of kind of baggage that can come just from where a claim was until it got to that point.
Yeah.
And so, assuming you are now, you've read the policy, you understand where those issues are, taking those and just presenting those questions to the adjuster, ultimately, and having them justify their interpretation of the policy, but keeping them really open-ended. Accusatory is not helpful. It is so much more difficult if you try to just, like, blunt force beat it out with logic.
Yeah. One of the first bits of guidance that we give homeowners that have a claim that is denied is that you are trying to get the insurance company to admit that they're wrong. And in that, even more detailed, you're trying to get a person on the other end of this to admit that they're wrong. And then beyond that, if it's your desk adjuster, your claim adjuster, your field adjuster that denied that claim wrongfully, they actually most likely don't even have the authority to admit they were wrong. Getting a denial overturned usually has to get escalated. It has to go to a supervisor. So not only, if you imagine the scenario that has to take place for your claim to get overturned, it's either going to be that adjuster who denied your claim going to their supervisor and saying, I think I made a mistake here.
They have to become your advocate.
They have to become your advocate. But more commonly, where we think claims are most likely getting overturned is when the homeowner or policyholder gets in contact with that supervisor one way or another, gets an email to them, gets the claim escalated on their own, and explains to them why this claim was wrongfully denied. And then that supervisor has to go tell the adjuster, you need to send a letter that is now extending coverage on this claim because it was wrongfully denied. Either way,
even I want to jump into some nuance there because you said even the idea of like, and explains to them why it was wrong. That seems like the straightforward, simple way to do it. But really, you have to be kind of sly about it. You need them to discover on their own why it's wrong to be successful.
Yeah, and you honestly, we all often say to people like, give the adjuster a way out. You actually don't want to corner them into feeling like they have to admit they were wrong. We'll tell people, again, that's like, it's too much to ask of a person.
It doesn't feel like it, right? It's like it wasn't too much for them to make sure that you were stuck with the bill for what your policy owed for. But you have to kind of put that aside and realize the hurdles that adjuster's up against. Like we said, they likely do not even have the authority. So now they have to do a job that they're frankly not getting paid for. Like they are not being paid to be your advocate and representative to get that claim covered. It is not within their scope of work. And they're now having to not only admit they made a mistake to their superior, but also go against or step outside of what their general scope of work is.
So we will often encourage the policyholder to present it in a way that allows the adjuster an out, as it were. Meaning you present it as, hey, I think a mistake was made here. Like almost like you're not upset about it, but you just have some questions about it. And you think that if it got a second look that everyone might realize that you just didn't explain yourself well the first time, right? That someone misunderstood you as the policyholder and you didn't do a good job explaining yourself before or pointing something out during the inspection, or a lot of water damage claims get denied because there's old water damage in an old house and that was nearby this new water damage and they were relating those two things and you didn't do a good job differentiating between those two things and pointing out, well, no, this is from a leak that was from 20 years ago and, it messed up the wood here a little bit, but it's just always looked like that. But this other new damage here is not from that. It is unrelated, and you didn't do a good job differentiating. Maybe you didn't even mention it at all, and your claim was denied because there's... So instead of accusatorially, I think that's a word, instead of accusing the adjuster of not doing a good investigation, you can take on some of that weight and responsibility and just say, I didn't do a good job pointing this out to you. I don't think I communicated or explained it well, but let me do so now. That's a good tactic. Another out you can give them is presenting it as new information. Right.
Yeah, often you'll see in that denial letter, it's like, we're happy to consider any new information that you have related to this loss. So if you can present anything as new information, they will repeatedly write that at the end of almost every communication.
So with that State Farm one that we talked a little bit about earlier, you might ask, I was reading through my policy and I found this section in the definitions that talks about the building structure. And it says that even the fill material, the aggregate material below my slab is considered part of the building structure. Am I mistaken to think that the dirt that's underneath my house is considered part of the building structure? And then even ask more questions about it and say, like, does that mean it's part of the building structure like the same way that my drywall is part of my building structure? Can you help me understand it a little bit more? And then almost just leave it there, because what you're doing is you're building up an argument of advocating for yourself. We have learned by mistake at times that putting everything forward right away and putting it forward in any type of aggressive tone just isn't going to be successful. So even though it might be justified, you might be upset and you have a reason to be if you actually want to get that claim overturned. I'm telling you, these little tips and strategies are going to be the way to go. We have learned the hard way that there are better ways of asking questions, of addressing a denial. So we've talked about needing to read your policy, needing to ask questions repeatedly in a tone that is aimed at being inquisitive and giving your adjuster a way out, right? These things are not easy, right? You're frustrated. You have to sit down and read that policy for a long time. Now you have to act really acquiescent and nice to that adjuster, really kind to that adjuster, just to get them to do the thing that they should have already done. It really speaks to what is probably most important if you want to get your claim denial overturned. And I think you'd agree with me in saying that it is perseverance. It is persistence. It is really having the strength to stick with it. And that is no small thing.
No.
It is incredibly difficult. And it is more than you should be asked of as the policyholder that's been paying the premiums. But it is what it takes most often, is a pretty high level of perseverance, wouldn't you say?
It's hard to keep your composure, right? And as tempting as it can be, and like sometimes you may be like, oh, they're not responding to this tone that I'm using. I'm not getting where I want to get with this questioning. And there's obviously every situation is different, and there are people on the other side of that. But we found pretty consistently that just staying inquisitive beyond what can feel comfortable or reasonable can be the ticket to actually succeeding in what is ultimately a very challenging endeavor of getting denials overturned.
Yeah. All right. So there's probably a lot more that we can go into. Maybe some point we'll even read some of the denial disputes that we've helped people to craft with Tugboat. We don't have to go over those right now, but if you have a claim that is denied, reach out to us, right? We're happy to go over that denial letter with you, to assess it, to see like if it's missing something, to see if there are questions you should be asking about it, and helping you to understand what steps you can take. We also very often are the third independent party that is telling someone, I'm really sorry, but it does look like this denial was justified based on the policy. As unfortunate as that is, as much as you know your agent or whoever sold you this policy made you think that this type of damage was going to be covered, even if you've seen commercials of things like this happening and they seem to be covered, it just happens that the policies aren't what you expect them to be, and they have language that a claim actually is going to stay denied. And so we oftentimes are having to tell people that as well. And as unfortunate as that is, we do appreciate being able to give people some peace of mind, even in those. We don't charge for that type of review. So if you do have a question about your denial, feel free to reach out at hello@tugboat.claims. You can also go to our website, sign up. It's free to sign up, free to get a claim review. You can DM us. You can leave a comment here. All kinds of options. But reach out to us. Reach out to someone that's a claim expert, that's an advocate, that can help you understand if your claim really should have been denied, if you are still owed money, if there are things that you can do to get that money that you are owed. And we'll help you do that. This has been the Tugboat Settle for More show. Excited to continue talking about some of these topics, ways for people to advocate for themselves. Excited to have other advocates talk about these as well. Everyone seems to have different strategies as to how they go about them. So watch out for that. Just make sure that you're asking questions. That's what I would say is the big thing that you learned today. We're going to talk about it more and more, and it seems like every show it kind of comes up again. But be inquisitive, be curious, be respectful, and hope for the best. And when all else fails, before all else fails, reach out to Tugboat. We're here to help. So we'll talk again soon.